I have a confession. I was one of those moms calling the after-hours nurse hotline at my pediatrician's office a lot. There was always some fever or rash, and that's why it's particularly amazing to talk with Dr. Michelle Wagner of Tuckahoe Pediatrics today. She's a pediatrician and mom of 3, so she's really been there, and she's covering all the things that you want to know about. Fevers, rashes, the never-ending cycle of daycare sickness, and of course, the topic that drives so many questions, what's normal when it comes to baby poop? And while this episode is so chock full of real, practical advice, the thing that really stuck with me is just how important the love you give your kids is to their health. This is Getting Started with Baby, the podcast that brings you practical tips, loved products, and lived experience from parents who've been there. Brought to you by thestarterset.com, an upcoming service focused on helping parents find just the right things at the right time, personalized for their families. I'm your host, Jane Deshevsky, a mom on the other side of 2 under 2. I'm still actively trying to figure all this out, and I'm bringing you perspectives from across the parenting spectrum. By the way, if you like what you hear, leave us a review or follow the podcast to help us keep growing. Let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Wagner. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So maybe to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, so I'm a pediatrician. I have 3 kids. My oldest is 8. He's a boy. I had him when I was in my 3rd year of medical school. And then I have a 6-year-old girl, had her in the middle of my residency, and a 3-year-old boy who I had during my chief year, which is an extra year we do just after the leadership year after residency. Before going into medicine, I spent 4 years as a teacher. So I taught 2nd grade for 2 years and then worked as a teacher in a hospital for 2 years. And that's what really got me interested in medicine.
Well, it sounds like you have your hands full, and that must have been quite a challenge going through medical school and having your first kid during that time as well.
Never a dull moment, that's for sure. Definitely now when I have a day off with the kids, which happens pretty often because I work in the hospital, I work shifts at this moment, it still feels like such a gift.
So you're in process of building your own practice. What makes you want to build your own practice, and how do you think about it being, I don't know, similar, different from what you've seen?
I mean, I think taking care of kids in any way, whether it's in the hospital, in a practice, in a free clinic, I love taking care of kids. I was looking for a way to at least some of the relationships to be able to sustain those over a longer period of time and truly take care of whole families, not just when they're sick or not just right after they've had their baby. So I'm hoping to start off very, very small, hopefully sustainably with maybe like 20 to 50 families, just doing home visiting for newborns and kids in a direct primary care model. So it would be membership based, and I'd be available to them and they could text me, call me. I can show up preferably in a pretty small geographic area around where I live.
So you're a mom of 3 yourself, and I think it's super fascinating too that you went through pregnancies and early childhood while also training to become a pediatrician. How has that impacted how you provide care, how you view what you're doing?
I think because I already had kids in residency and already had kids in medical school, even at a time when some of my supervising doctors who were wonderful practicing pediatricians but didn't have kids, they'd say something offhand, like some piece of advice that they were trying to give to families about, like giving an antibiotic 3 times a day to an 18-month-old. And I'd almost laugh, not in a mean way, but it's just the advice is so much harder to follow in real life. I think being in healthcare and being a mom, I could really relate to the struggles parents were going through so much more closely. And I think before you've ever, say, tried to feed a baby, you have no idea what the challenges of breastfeeding or formula feeding or just getting the calories into your baby. You have no idea what battle someone is fighting. And I think being on the healthcare side and meeting a lot of different families in very sort of vulnerable moments, I think that really has shaped my view. You just truly have no idea what other parents are experiencing and what their struggles are. And so I think I was able to have a lot more, I don't want to say more, but just a very innate sense of grace and empathy and always giving parents the benefit of the doubt in a way that I don't know if I would have been able to if I hadn't gone through a lot of those steps on my own.
Yeah, that's so important. And that's something that I hear from moms so often is that they are also looking for a doctor who's going to match their energy in a way that doesn't make them feel worse when they go, right?
99.9% of the time, a parent's instincts about their child are right. So if they think you're missing something, if they think there's more there than what you're seeing, it's probably true.
Yeah, you can just tell that something with your kid isn't quite like their normal selves. Those first time the kid gets sick or those first weeks, not really knowing what to expect or being a first time parent, you don't really know if what you're seeing is what you should be seeing or if it's okay or if it's not okay. So, what are some of the things you wish that parents knew from the beginning that you you have the experience to know now?
Your pediatrician, their office, everyone there expects you to call if you have concerns, and no one's going to think that your concerns are silly. Every single pediatrician, even if you're worried it's going to waste our time, would much rather you call and check in or send a portal message or try to contact us directly. And not that there's anything wrong with looking things up online, but I think you can often put yourself down a rabbit hole, and then before you know it, you've spent your entire window where you could be sleeping looking at Google. It's just like it can really set you back. And I think I felt this as a new parent. Almost like I was embarrassed that I didn't know more, and I cared a lot what the doctor was going to think of me or what whoever I was
Mm.
calling was going to think of me. I was talking to a group of moms the other day, and we all had 3 kids, and we were like, yeah, by our third kid, we just like didn't care what anyone thought of us anymore. But I wish I could go back to myself or to any parent who's it's their first time and sort of take away no one is judging you on a phone call or at the pediatrician's office for asking for help or for asking about things that are totally normal. This is what we do. I would say most of the thing that parents worry about a lot that I think pediatricians can help with are rashes. Almost all of them are nothing to worry about, but tend to be the things that are keeping parents up at night. A reasonable concern, but parents are really worried their babies, especially if they're breastfeeding, not getting enough to eat. And just know that's why we
Oh,
see
yeah,
your
been
baby
there.
like 10 times in the first 2 months. So, yes, you can track the diapers at home. You can track as much as you can at home, but that's why you're bringing your baby in every 2 to 5 days. The pediatrician is there to guide you and tell you, oh, they need more to tell you if you're on track. And it's super stressful. That's why these visits are designed. They already feel like you never leave your pediatrician's office for the first few weeks. That's what we're here for. And then I get so many questions about babies pooping.
There's like YouTube videos on this. Yeah.
And I have done videos on this one, but yeah, this one generally, if the poop is soft, that's not something we're too worried about.
The poop thing is a very common parent concern. So maybe once and for all. I don't know if it'll be once and for all because people will always have this question. But what is the range of normal when it comes to baby poop in terms of frequency and other questions that you might get?
Such a good question. Um, General, it can be anywhere up to after every single feed, which can happen in some breastfed babies, especially early on. So that could be anywhere from 8 to 13 times a day at the beginning. But it's also normal for babies to go 5, 6, 7 days without pooping. I would say you're probably starting like, and that even doesn't mean there's a problem. I'd say where you're getting close to a week, you should call your pediatrician to check in. There's some other tips and tricks they can give you to help the baby poop. But say it's been 5 days, baby turns bright red, pushes as hard as they can, makes a huge, soft, poop filled diaper. You have nothing to worry about, even though they went the 5 days. The things we look for are if there's blood in the poop, that's always a sign that we're worried about. Or if the poop is really light white, the color of a sheet, or lighter than you would expect it, those can be signs of problems. So you'd want to
Mhm.
call your pediatrician about that. Or if when the poop comes out, it looks like adult poop, like it's formed or in ball. Baby poop's supposed to be really soft and mushy. All they're eating is breast milk or formula. They're not supposed to be able to form their poops. So those would be what would raise your alarms. The other thing you're looking for is if babies tend to look pretty red, grunty, uncomfortable while the poop's actually coming out. But when they're not pushing the poop out, they should be comfortable. Their belly should be soft and they should be feeding and soothing and just acting normal all around. So I would say if your baby's acting pretty normal, still feeding well, you probably don't have to worry about how much they're pooping.
Okay, that's super helpful. So you mentioned, and I think this is very real, that you can sort of work yourself up if you're trying to Google things. I know now people are doing ChatGPT, which is slightly less alarmist than Google. But there were a lot of times where I would Google something and the Google response would be much more alarming. And then I'd call the nurse hotline. They'd be like, don't worry. But are there common things like that that you feel like parents end up getting worked up about? I remember one for me was fever. I was really worried about any kind of fever, and I'd call the doctor and they'd be like, you're fine.
So we are so serious about fevers in newborn babies. Up to 4 weeks, any fever, you have to go to the emergency room. You have to not just go to the emergency room, but spend the night in the hospital, get a huge workup, just because we know babies that age are at such high risk of having a bacterial infection that we could be missing. And then from age 1 to 3 months, you absolutely want to call your pediatrician, and your pediatrician's probably going to bring you in. Then the second they turn 3 months, it's like we don't care about fevers anymore, which sounds completely absurd because you're like, wait, but like 3 weeks ago, I had to call for anything, bring me in and do all these tests and all of this. But then after 3 months onward, we basically treat them like a big kid, assuming they're getting their regularly scheduled recommended care from the pediatrician. We have, based on a huge data set of millions of children, what the risk is of a more serious infection. When babies are born, there's close to almost a 10% chance that any fever could be an infection in their bloodstream or an infection around their brain. By the time they get to 3 months, we know the risk of those things is less than 1%. So that's why we care so much about fevers at the beginning, is because there is a really high risk of a serious bacterial infection that would need immediate treatment in the hospital. And after 3 months, that risk is pretty much gone.
Having that context is very
Because it's so
useful.
confusing, because you're like, but you told me to call, and now you're telling me not, that I don't have to worry.
And as a parent, you're like, this baby's still tiny. Like, what? So the other thing you mentioned, which is another one that is such a common, especially in first-time parents, concern, is around feeding, right? Like, especially if you're breastfeeding. I mean, I know with my first one, I got so worked up, I bought a scale. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I think that might have made it worse, but
Did you feel like it was helpful, or like it made it worse for you?
I think it probably depends on the personality. I'm not sure it was helpful to me because I'm on the more anxious side anyway.
Breastfeeding is really hard, even for parents who have breastfed a million times before. It's really hard. And I think for most of us, we want real, concrete numbers, answers. And I know plenty of moms who actually would pump instead of direct breastfeed because they wanted to know exactly how much their baby was getting. I think it's a completely natural instinct. I do think lactation consultants are just about angels on earth, are the people I trust so much. And there are, in most places, there are quite a few of them who will do home visits. And a lot of those are actually fully covered by insurance. So much of what they can do is weigh the baby before they feed and then weigh after they feed, and then give you an idea of, okay, your baby took 37 milliliters in this feed, which means you need to give about this much supplementation after each feed, and how to phase that out. I think they're just pretty awesome that way. And I think most moms, myself included, struggle with, do I have enough milk? Is my baby growing well? All of this. I think however you feed your baby, whether you do some breast milk, some formula, all breast milk, there's benefits of breastfeeding all the way through. But so much of the benefit of breastfeeding, the studies aren't able to distinguish between those babies who benefited with supplementation and those babies who benefited without. The benefits are across the antibody benefits, the colostrum benefits. If you've done any breastfeeding, there's a huge benefit. And I was really hard on myself about this, I think partly because I was back at work and I felt like if I didn't give my child exclusive breast milk, it meant I was a worse mom. So I was pumping all the time and then wasn't really making enough, but then would like wake myself up in the middle of the night to do extra, just by my third, I was just like, no, this isn't worth giving up my middle of the night sleep to do these 2 extra pumping sessions. I'm still breastfeeding, but those extra bottles are not coming from me. I wish I'd just been able to shift my mindset a little sooner, that as much breastfeeding as a parent can do that works for their family and works for their mental health is what we recommend. It's not an all or nothing battle. And I don't think we can talk enough about how managing stress for moms and just making things work for the whole family in every way, how important that is.
I hear from a lot of, especially when the moms are in that first time mom place, there's so much pressure to breastfeed, and that's like the only thing that you can do. And if it's not working, you go through this whole cycle of triple feeding and waking up to pump. When you're not feeding, you're pumping. You're basically just not doing anything else the whole day. Very challenging mentally. Hearing your mental health is also important as the mom, right? That's such an important message. And you mentioned that also, like, your experience having 3 kids, it kind of varied from kid to kid. So what was that like? Did you see a difference between 1 and 2? Did you get more relaxed at 3? What did that look like?
I feel like after the first one, I didn't actually feel like I had it down, but I felt pretty confident because at that point I was a pediatrician. I was in residence. It couldn't possibly be that hard to do it again. And I do think every kid is just completely challenging in their own way. It was pretty clear I was kind of at capacity, even with just the one. And so it's sort of like losing all expectations of what it was supposed to look like or how it was supposed to be or how much I was supposed to do this, and this. I wasn't putting nearly as much pressure on myself to do anything except feed my kids and keep them healthy and minimal outside expectations, especially in those first few months. I think that is what made it easier, but not necessarily the experience of already having the kid, because I found each kid to be just wildly different. I think breastfeeding got easier for me with each kid, which was really nice. But, my first one didn't sleep great. I mean, he was a pretty normal baby sleeper. My second one, we didn't sleep train her or anything, and she just started sleeping through the night when she was 7 weeks old. My third did not consistently sleep through the night till he turned 2. And that was despite our best efforts in doing everything that I thought I knew how to. I'm the same mom. I did the same things with all of them. I have the same husband. He did. Same with stuff like potty training. You think you know what you're doing, and then your kid just really shows you who's boss each round you do it. And I think my hubris disappeared more and more with each one, that I have like any control over what happens with a lot of these.
That actually is honestly so helpful, though, because there's so much pressure that the thing that you're doing is not right. It probably actually helps to even see that genes combined 3 times or 2 times or whatever have produced wildly different results in terms of personality and interests, etc.
Completely. And I think there is a part of it that we can control, but I think it's always a much smaller part than we imagine ourselves to be doing. And I do think the most important thing that we can do as parents is provide safety, warmth, comfort, love, those basics, doing our best to get them to eat the things we want them to eat and to get enough sleep every day and to, get outside and play and exercise. Just so much of it is up to them.
And I'm super curious. There's been a real proliferation of apps to track things. What is your stance on that? Is that good? Is that bad? Do people need it?
Same as I think with the scale or with any monitoring of anything for a baby. If it's truly relieving your stress as a parent and making you feel more confident and better in your ability to thrive and take care of your baby, then if an app is facilitating that well, then that makes sense. I have a lot of friends who are extremely organized, thrive on a schedule. Some of those like structures having in place of having a place to track their diapers and the lengths of their feeds was really comforting and helpful to them. And I think really helps their family function. That is what the app is doing for you. By all means, I think any app, tool, gadget, anything that's bringing extra stress into your life as a mom, which for me, they were always one more thing to touch and track, get behind on. So it wasn't the right tool for me. If you prefer to trust your baby's cues, to feed them when they're hungry, change their diaper when they're wet or dirty, following their sleep cues as well, that when they're awake, they're alert, smiling, interactive, hungry, not getting too overtired in between naps. That also is a great way, especially for the first few months, to navigate it. From the second you meet your baby, you're spending essentially 24 hours a day with your baby. So you learn their routine. Even if you were to do minimal outside reading and research and talking to people, moms and dads, but especially moms, can tell when their baby's tired, can tell when their baby's hungry, and you start to pick up on those things really, really quickly.
We're heading into a time period where there is much sickness going around, particularly if you have a child in daycare. Any tips? I know when my children entered daycare, no matter what people said to me about, oh, you're going to be sick, I was unprepared.
I don't think there's a way to prepare for it, because you don't actually have a sense until you're in it. Whenever that first year in daycare is, whether it's in their first year of life, second, they're going to average about 1 to 2 colds a month. And each cold is going to last about 2 weeks. And especially in respiratory season, it's usually going to be closer to 2 than 1. They maybe get close to all the way better for a day or two before the next one hits. I think a lot of parents come in and are like, my child definitely has an immune deficiency. And as long as those illnesses are not frequently putting your child in the hospital or not frequently leading double pneumonias or sort of much that may happen once in a while to healthy kids from back-to-back illnesses. But for the most part, most families are just really struggling through these back-to-back illnesses at home. And that's a sign of a healthy child that they're getting through them and then getting the next one and building their immunity. To every parent I meet who's had a child in daycare from pretty early on, I just say, oh, when they get to kindergarten, they're never getting sick again. They'll never miss a day of school because they've
Great.
fought it all off all the way through. Because that's going to happen. The bigger a child's lungs are, the slightly better the breathing part is. They're not completely incapacitated in their ability to feed from the congestion. But
Mhm.
whenever that first year of consistent exposure to other kids is, whether it happens shortly after they're born or a few years later, is just going to be a really tough year in terms of illnesses.
When they're little, under 4, there's so little that it feels like you can do for them. What can you do to help them feel more comfortable?
Actually, I would say one of the best parts of if parents are continuing to breastfeed, even if it's not breastfeeding, is not the only source of nutrition, but even any breastfeeding is extremely, extremely soothing to babies, especially if they're sick and they may not breastfeed all the time, but you can breastfeed right before bed or clean their nose out, saline and suction, which really helps them. And then instead of them losing their minds because they just got suctioned, you can put them straight to breast. That can be really soothing tool. I mean, at least for mine, when we do things like immunizations with our pediatrician, I breastfed all 3 of mine until they were about 2 years old. And so all the way up through their 18-month shots, I would just have them attached to me as they were giving the shots, and only half the time did they even wake up. Like
Wow.
it is such a powerful soothing tool if that's something that is still kind of in your toolbox to give to your kid. I would also say nasal saline drops, even if you just do the drops and don't go through the suction and then using a bulb suction after that, can be really effective if you do that right before they go to sleep to get them a longer first stretch of sleep. And then whether they're bottle or breastfeeding before a feed can really help them to feed and soothe while they're sick. And then for infants, even once you think maybe have outgrown this, cuddling, holding, doing skin to skin, warm baths maybe more often than you would otherwise to help clear out all the junk
Mhm.
they've got.
That's good to have in the toolbox. Any even small tips that parents might not commonly think of?
You cannot overestimate the importance of keeping yourself healthy, but doing what you can to manage your stress so that you really can enjoy your time with your kids when you get it. Just modeling as often as possible. And no one is perfect at this, but model, like if there's 2 parents in the home, modeling loving relationships and it's just supportive, warm, safe home environment where I feel like I make it seem like your home should be like a yoga studio at choir or something. That I don't think we can overestimate the effect of a loving, safe home where kids feel welcome and can just truly relax and release their stress the second they get in and know that the people there love them. And I'm not just saying this to be warm and fuzzy. So many studies show that just kids knowing they are loved, knowing that their parents are happy to see them, and knowing that their parents are having as little household stress as possible by parents taking care of themselves and loving each other. This really, really, really is important to kids' health.
Such a powerful thing to remember too, that even if everything doesn't go perfect, having that loving home is really important.
There was a series of studies done about like adverse childhood experiences, so traumatic childhood experiences, things like loss of a parent, extremely stressful home environments with things like abuse and truly terrible things, and looking at not just mental health conditions, but physical health conditions, high blood pressure, heart disease, strokes, all kinds of these conditions, and the likelihood of adults having serious health conditions could be directly predicted in a dose response way, meaning the more traumatic experiences that a child has, to the point that if you had more than 4, you're close to 200 times more likely to having some of these adult health conditions. And some subsequent studies are looking at sort of the converse of that, these positive childhood experiences, meaning always having a safe and loving home, having a parent who they knew would love them no matter what, and how those are actually extremely protective against those same health conditions.
It would make sense that there's an impact from having those traumatic experiences, but it's so interesting to also hear the inverse, that having the positive experiences actually also just sets you up for those more positive outcomes.
And these studies are newer. I think there's more
Mhm.
that has to be done. I think some of the best ones are looking at maternal stress, especially
Mhm.
pregnancy and early childhood, and how that affects kids. I just think the more we learn about any of this stuff, about how much parents and kids are connected emotionally and through mental health, the more we're going to realize loving your kid keeps them healthy.
Wow, what a powerful thought. Well, switching tacks a little bit, this podcast is brought to us by a service called The Starter Set. That's an upcoming service to help parents reduce decision fatigue and research burden and find the things that are right for them. In your experience as a mom or as a pediatrician, is there anything you swear by that you think is super helpful for parents to have?
The first was in medical school, so we weren't buying anything extra.
Yeah.
This was just like what we absolutely needed, which I think was a really good lesson. All this stuff that's being advertised to me that I really and truly couldn't afford was actually mostly things I didn't need. I would say a good baby carrier. I just love to be outside moving around. A lot of good ones out there. We used the Ergo Baby
Hmm.
360. We got it 9 years ago, and I used it all through with all the kids, front, back, every which way. It never fell apart. I mean, I would take it in the pool sometimes, like if I
Wow.
had one on me and I was wading in, and would wash it after. I mean, that thing has held up through everything, and I used it at least once a day for probably 8 years.
That's
Um,
amazing.
we did get, I found this one actually on Craigslist, but I loved it. I got a Bob jogging stroller and then a Bob double jogger because I really like to be able to go on trails and then to be able to run. I feel like many times it saved my sanity as a parent to have just a good stroller that I could go any pace with. And then at one point, when I bought my breast pump, we used Medela, but I know there's a lot of different good ones out there, but instead of pumping into the bags, at first I would just pump and then dump into the bags. And then, because my mom was helping us with our kids a ton, but like all that good fat layer is just stuck inside the bag and I can't get it back into the bottle. So I feel like I'm not giving the baby everything. So I just bought like the entire line that matched my pump so that each pumping session I could just save as a feed for the next day.
Mm.
It took a much bigger cooler to be able to transport it back and forth, but that was such a game changer. We loved the Halo sleep sacks. Those were by far our favorites. We got other kinds and threw them all away and just had those full time. I'm pretty big on using things for as long as possible. So the Halo sleep sack is like the sack on the inside and the two arm things on the outside. You don't really want to swaddle the hips tightly because that can interfere with their hip development. So I
Mhm.
always knew that it was just going to be their upper body that was well swaddled and their hips would always be free to move. Once they got to the point where they were rolling over, I could just use that same Velcro and just Velcro it under their arms
Mm.
so they could still have a sleep sack on. But I didn't have to buy multiple stages
Yeah.
of sleep sacks. I could use the same ones all through. And then the ones we had unzipped from the bottom and from the top. So I could change the diaper while they were swaddled. I'm sure there's other ones like that too, but
Yeah.
those ones I had 20. I've since given them away because we use them for every nap, every sleep.
Anything that you think parents gravitate towards that is probably unnecessary?
I'm sure there's a parent for every gadget that's out there that it's going to really help. I would say the thing I see most often that is like the little hand covers that you
Mhm.
can get to keep the child from scratching their face that fall off all the time. I just think they always get lost. That you can never keep them together. But also after the first few days, you really want kids to be looking at and playing with their hands whenever they're not asleep and swaddled. So I think they can sometimes interfere with the baby's ability to like look at and play with their hands.
Mm.
We were gifted a very nice baby monitor that never actually left the box. We lived in a very small space. So like it was kind of like, well, I mean, I'm going to hear my baby if anything happens. But I know some
Mhm.
people really like having the baby monitors. But for us, that was, I don't know, the like $250 baby monitor someone had gifted us. 6 years later, just gave to someone else in the box because we'd never even taken it out. I didn't buy a fancy regular stroller. By the time I had my third kid, this seems a little late for this. And I really wish from the beginning, because I knew where I was hoping I was going to have more than one child, had invested in the nicest stroller system I could have to be able to fit multiple kids in different
Mhm.
directions and
Mhm.
go on all different kinds of terrains. I never actually did that, but I do think I just remember looking at the prices and being like, oh, I don't know why I would ever need that. And I was like, oh, it's kind of like your car.
I mean, that was my regret too, because we thought we were only gonna have one, and so I now somehow have an obscene amount of strollers. We didn't get the one that expanded, and I was like, "Oh, I don't wanna spend that much on a stroller," and, so on and so forth. But you actually made a really good point about the Bob stroller as well, which is that those big ticket items, but actually on the secondhand market, you can get gently used ones for such reasonable prices. And you can get that, like, whatever it is that you want that's going to support your family.
Absolutely. And like, I feel very lucky that I got to just use it all through all the kids.
And I think that's another good point too, that especially if you're planning on having multiple kids, or even in those cases, sometimes spending the money on the thing that's higher quality, like, ends up being the better choice. Just in general from this conversation, if you had to have like a thing that someone would take away from it, what would be your biggest takeaway?
Like, the most important thing you can give your baby is your love and your time. And if you need help, your pediatrician's always there for you.
Thank you so much for being a part of this. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review or follow the podcast to stay up to date on new episodes. Know someone else who could use the episode? Please pass it on. Interested to hear more or get in touch with Dr. Wagner? You can follow her on Instagram at Tuckahoe Pediatrics, link in the episode description. Have topics you'd like us to cover? Find us on Instagram at thestarterset_baby or reach out via info@thestarterset.com. Thank you for listening. Till next time.